At my grandmother's funeral, her lawyer pulled me aside and told me something that made the entire room go quiet when it came out. She had left almost everything, her house, her savings, decades of quiet sacrifice, to me, not to her own children, not to my mother, or my aunts, or my uncle, me, and taped inside her old jewelry box was a letter that finally explained a secret our family had carried for almost 50 years without ever speaking it out loud. My name is Sarah. My grandmother, Eleanor, passed away last spring, quietly, in her sleep, at 89 years old. She'd lived alone for the last decade, in the same small house she'd owned since before I was born. I used to visit her every other weekend, just to sit with her, drink tea, and listen to her stories. She was sharp until the very end, funny, a little stubborn, the kind of woman who remembered everyone's birthday but never made a fuss about her own. At the funeral, after everyone had gone home, her lawyer, a soft-spoken older man named Mr. Davies, asked if he could speak with the family privately. My mother was there, my Aunt Diane, my Uncle Richard, and me. Mr. Davies read the will slowly, carefully. The house, the savings account, which turned out to be far larger than any of us expected, a small collection of jewelry, all of it, every single piece, left to me. My mother went pale. My Aunt Diane actually laughed, a short, disbelieving sound, before covering her mouth. My Uncle Richard just sat there, staring at the table. There has to be a mistake, my mother said quietly. We're her children. Sarah is just a granddaughter. Mr. Davies shook his head gently. There's no mistake. She was very clear about this, and she updated the will herself several times over the last 20 years. She also left a letter. She asked that it only be opened by Sarah, alone, after the reading. I remember driving home that night with the letter sitting, unopened, on the passenger seat, afraid to touch it. Part of me wanted to understand. Another part of me was terrified of what I might find. I didn't open it until almost a week later, sitting alone at my kitchen table, late at night, the house quiet around me. The letter was 4 pages long, written in my grandmother's familiar, careful handwriting. It started simply, My dear Sarah, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and you probably have a lot of questions. I owe you the truth, even if it's 50 years late. What she wrote next changed the way I understood my entire family. My grandmother explained that, back in the 19s, she'd made a decision that shaped everything that came after it. A decision none of her children ever knew about. My grandfather, a man I'd only known through old photographs, since he passed away before I was born, had a serious gambling problem in the early years of their marriage. Not a small habit, a dangerous one. He'd quietly taken out loans against the house, twice, without her knowledge, nearly losing everything the family had. The second time it happened, my grandmother discovered it before it was too late. She paid off the debt herself, using money she'd saved secretly for years, from a small sewing business she ran out of their home. Money my grandfather never fully knew existed. She made him promise to get help, and he did, eventually, quietly, through a support group at their local church. He never gambled again after that. But my grandmother never fully trusted him with the family's finances again either. Not completely, not for the rest of their marriage. Here's the part that mattered most. When my grandfather passed away, 30 years ago now, he left a small life insurance policy. One my grandmother didn't know the full amount of until after his death. It was worth more than she expected. Enough, she wrote, to finally feel a little safe for the first time in my life. Instead of spending it, or splitting it right away among her children, she quietly invested almost all of it, slowly, carefully, over 3 decades, with the help of a financial advisor she trusted completely, a distant cousin of hers named Walter, who never charged her a proper fee, and who checked in with her personally every single year until he retired. She never told her children about the investment, partly, she wrote, because she didn't want them changing how they treated each other over money that didn't exist yet, and partly, honestly, because she'd watched money change people before, and she wanted to wait until she was certain of what kind of people her children, and eventually her grandchildren, would grow into. Over the years, She watched quietly. She watched my mother work 2 jobs for years to put my brother and me through college, never once complaining, never once asking her own mother for help, even when things were tight. She watched my Aunt Diane build a comfortable, successful life on her own terms, needing nothing from anyone. And she watched my Uncle Richard, over many years, struggle with financial decisions that worried her deeply. Decisions she quietly helped cover more than once, in ways none of us ever fully knew about. She wrote that she loved all 3 of her children completely, without any difference in her heart. But money, she said, has a way of revealing things that love alone sometimes cannot fix. She chose me, specifically, for reasons she laid out plainly in that letter. She'd watched me, over the years, quietly caring for her, without ever being asked, driving 2 hours some weekends just to sit with her, remembering small details about her life that even her own children sometimes forgot. She said she didn't want to reward effort with money. Exactly. She wanted, in her words, to make sure the quiet ones, the ones who give without expecting anything back, aren't the ones left with nothing, simply because they never asked. She also left instructions, gentle but clear, for how she hoped I might use what she'd left behind. Not a requirement, a hope. She asked that I consider using part of it to help my mother finally retire comfortably, something my mother had quietly given up hoping 4 years ago. And she asked that I keep a closer eye on my uncle, Richard, not with money necessarily, but with attention, the kind of quiet family support he'd always been a little too proud or a little too ashamed to ask for directly. I sat with that letter for a long time that night. I cried, more than once, not just from grief, but from finally understanding a woman I thought I already knew completely. I called a family meeting 2 weeks later. I didn't read them the letter, not word for word. Some of it felt too personal, too much a private conversation between her and me. But I told them the parts that mattered. I told them about the gambling, about the insurance policy, about 30 years of quiet, careful saving that none of us ever knew about. My mother cried. My Aunt Diane sat in stunned silence for a long time, before finally saying, quietly, that explains so much about how careful she always was about money, even when she didn't need to be. My Uncle Richard didn't say much that day, but a week later, he called me, his voice unusually quiet, and thanked me for what I chose to do next.